Good morning, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started here. And today we are on chapter 9 of the story. So you have that. If you have that with you, you can break that out. Otherwise, we're in the book of Ruth. And one of the neat things about the book of Ruth is it's a shorter thing, so I get more time to go into some of the backstory of things. So let's go ahead and open with prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your faithfulness. We thank you that you continue to bring in more and more people into the story. We pray that you would guide us and direct us as you worked in the past, so we might see your faithfulness as it continues into today. We pray this, Father, in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. Okay, so the book of Ruth. Now, where were we at last week? Which book was it? Judges, or chapter 8, right? So the book of Judges. How would you describe, from what we've heard about from the book of Judges, what was the state of the nation of Israel? Not good. Good summary thing. They did what was good in their own eyes, what was right in their own sight, right? And we have this kind of progression to these cycles, and not necessarily that things are getting better. God is continuing to rescue the people. God is continuing to bring them out, but it's not good. It's not going well. Now, the book of Judges, talking about how God is working to rescue the people, and it covers a goodly length of time. So today, right, we're getting into the book of Ruth, and we're going to be kind of hearing about things here. We hear that Ruth is set during the time of the judges. And if we take a look at kind of when the various judges were at work, probably, we're not certain, but probably what we're hearing about in Ruth is happening roughly about the time of Gideon. So towards the later period of the judges. And we hear that what's the big nation that we hear about in Ruth? Kind of like where Moab. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about Moab here to kind of get a better sense of the context. I think the historical context here is pretty important to really get a better sense of exactly what God is doing, because if you were already hearing Pastor Richard's message this morning, there's a reason why this book is in the scriptures. So Moab is a nation to the east of the Dead Sea. All right. So nation to the east of the Dead Sea, like most of the other nations we hear about in this time period, in this area, they're kind of related. So if you go back and take a look at the origin of the nation of Moab, it's not especially glorious. So who remembers Lot? Yeah. There you go. Okay, so Lot coming out of Sodom, right? Who gets out of Sodom? So the historical quiz. So Lot and his wife and his daughters get out of Sodom. Who finishes getting out of Sodom? Not Lot's wife, right? So it's Lot and his daughters. So now his daughters, right? They were engaged, or they were going to be married, as far as we know, right? Because Lot is trying to bring them out as well after they get this message about the judgment that's coming on Sodom. But these two guys, they're like, oh, we're staying here with our families. Thank you very much. Doesn't work out well for them. Now, where does that leave Lot's daughters? Unmarried and with no prospects in a different city that they're kind of strangers in. So before they're living out, so maybe it's because Lot is a little bit hesitant to like be in a city after what he saw happen to the last place where they were living, but they're living they're not in a village, but kind of out in a cave, right? In the middle of nowhere. So Lot's daughters are kind of despairing that they're not going to be married, they're not going to have children to be able to raise, and is in their older years to take care of them, everything. So they have this brilliant plan that, hey, let's get our father drunk, have sex with him, and so we can have children. So he'll provide children for us. And they do. Not once, but twice, both of the daughters. And so one of these children becomes the founding for the people of Moab. So, okay, that's the Moabites. And then, because if you remember back as we've gone through these things too, how well does it work when God's people have taken kind of his promises in their own, like, oh, we'll do it this way. Not good. Not when we see that borne out again. So the Moabites, as we're going through the Old Testament, they are continually at conflict with the people of Israel, with the children of Israel. So there's tension, is probably putting it mildly. In other places, like if we take a look through, I got some notes on this one. If we take a look through some of the things here, remember back as God's people were coming through the land and we're heading to the promised land in the wanderings led by Moses. God has delivered them. You remember Balaam, right? So Balaam was the prophet that the king was hiring to go and curse the Hebrews, but instead they get blessed 3 times. But through that, then the people are spared from the curse. They're given a blessing, but then they turn to sexual immorality with the Moabites and the spiritual idolatry that was coming along with that too, as they were in the wanderings. In Judges, we hear again Israel running after the gods of Moab. In other places later on, after the time of Ruth, there's other conflicts. So there's all this going on. Actually, fun thing is, like a little bit later on when we get to the divided kingdom, so after the split between the north of Israel and the south of Judah, there is a time when actually they get back together to unify briefly to fight against who? The Moabites. So all that's going on. And there's several things where the Lord speaks kind of judgments against Moab as well. So that's kind of where we're at. It's this pagan culture at odds with God's people. So that said, we start out the book of Ruth. And if you can imagine, there's a headline, right? If there were a newspaper or a web page or something back then, right? Family flees famine. Because you've got this woman and her husband and her sons that there's no food, there's no bread. What are their names? Naomi is the wife. Elimelech, or Elimelech, which is my God is king. And then their two sons, Man and Kilian, right? And so they go to Moab. Where are they from? Bethlehem. Bethlehem, if for those of us big on the Hebrew, is house of bread. Where's there no bread? Bethlehem. Why is there no bread in Bethlehem in the time of the Judges? There's a famine. Why is there maybe a famine? Because the people are doing what is right in their own sight. God's people are not being faithful. And so God uses tools like famine to wake them up. So things are bad in Bethlehem. Things are bad in Judah. And so we have this family that flees, that goes to Moab, and then they're there for a decent period of time. But while they're there, Elimelech dies. So Naomi is widowed. But her sons, they have wives. So who are these wives? Are they from the good girls of Judah and Israel? No, they're Moabites. So they get married to these Moabite women. Okay, so that's fine. There's hope for Naomi because she has these daughters now, daughters-in-law. So they're going to have some children. Everything's going to be great. But then both her sons die. We don't know the circumstances, but she's left now in kind of a pretty bad state. Because if you think about it, back then, the women were not allowed to necessarily own property or to have the ability to take care of themselves in terms of an earning an income and things. So they were entirely dependent on the husbands or sons to take care of them. So if she's widowed, if her wives or her daughters-in-law are now both widowed, there's not really much hope for them there. But what word did they get? What's the news about back home in Bethlehem? The famine's over. God is providing for his people. So we're going to go, or Naomi's saying, I'm going to go back home. Because that's where her relatives are. And this is going to be significant in a little bit here, but she's going to go back where her relatives are. So that's good. Is she expecting her daughters-in-law to go with her? No, of course not. Because who are they? They're Moabites, one, which means that they're worshiping other gods. They're from an idolatrous people. And two, she's not expecting them to up and go to a foreign place, a place where they don't know. She's been here for 10 years or so, but she's going to go back home. She's not expecting them to go with her because it's not like, as she says here in what we heard in the reading for this morning too, that she's going to be able to provide new sons for her. They need to go back to their families. They need to get new husbands so they can have happy lives. They can be, so that they can have what they're supposed to have, because they're still probably pretty young and have an opportunity for having things play out in kind of an expected way. So they make ready to go. Great. But who says they're going to go with her? Both of them. Both of them say, both Orpah and Ruth say they're going to go with Naomi. What does that say about their relationship? It was a good relationship. Yeah. I would like to think that's possible. And it doesn't explicitly say it, but there's reason to think that that is the case, is that if you guys didn't hear that they have come to know Yahweh through Naomi and her family. And so maybe they're no longer worshiping the gods of the people of Moab. So they've kind of already left home in that way. So they're both going to go with her, but again, Naomi prevails upon them, saying, just have a good life here. It's okay. And Orpah turns and goes back. She goes back to her family and back to, presumably back to the gods of Moab. But Ruth does not. And she has this very, very strong proclamation of her loyalty to Naomi. This is something that oftentimes, have you guys ever heard this at a wedding? Maybe so this is one of these passages here. So Ruth says to Naomi, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me and more. Also, if anything but death parts me from you." So that's a pretty strong thing. There's a plea against separation. Don't let us be separated. She wants to be with Naomi. There's a promise of family loyalty, that she's going to be sticking with her, that her people, that Naomi's people will be Ruth's people. Your God will be my God. That's kind of the big thing right there too. That's the confession of the faith, that it's going to be Yahweh that's going to be my God. And that there's this oath that she takes against separation, that if I were to leave you, let me be dead. So that's where it's at. Okay, and then they return. So they're going back to Bethlehem, going back to, what does Bethlehem mean again? House of bread, Bethlehem. So go back to this house of bread, and let's see what happens. So they get back, they go. We don't exactly know where they're staying, but they return back. But everybody's like, hey, because it's not like Bethlehem is a booming metropolis or something like Belvedere. As, smaller space so that they know. It's like, oh, hey, we know Naomi. What you been up to? It's like, well, you remember Elimelech? Yeah, he's dead. You remember my sons? Yeah, they're dead. And so Naomi says, don't call me Naomi anymore. Call me Mara, which means bitter, because she's bitter, because her life has been taken. So that's kind of the place we're getting back to here. So she's back. Ruth, the Moabite, the outsider, is back with her, and then they arrive in Bethlehem. So in kind of like the March, April time frame here, as the barley harvest is coming up. So that's kind of the setting of the stage here. Now, if you read through chapter 9, if you read through the book of Ruth, we hear kind of the next thing that happens is that, well, Ruth is going to go out, because who do they have to provide for them? Nobody. They got to go. They got to get food. And God had provision for his people with some of the Levitical code and the laws for the people as they were put into the land, that as they were harvesting their fields, they shouldn't harvest it completely. They shouldn't take all the grain, all the crops. They need to leave a part of it behind. And that the part they leave behind is for those that come through and glean from the crops. So rather than stripping it all clean, they need to leave some there for those that don't have any other way to provide for themselves, don't have their own fields or crops or any of those things. So they can come through and pick up from the food so they can have something too. Because whose field is it anyway? It's God's. So God has given this instruction to the people so that nobody is left wanting. And that's part of the instruction that God gave to his people. We'll get to more a little bit later on. So Naomi tells Ruth to go and to do this gleaning, to go out. So the reapers are going through the fields, collecting the harvest, and leaving some behind. So she's gleaning kind of some of the leftovers there. And it just so happens this field where she's at belongs to whom? Boaz. Well, and who's Boaz? Well, turns out that he is a relative of Elimelech. So, okay. Not that Ruth knows that, but in this way, kind of God provides. And Boaz comes out to the field, sees his workers collecting all the harvest, and he sees that there's a woman kind of following behind. It's like, well, who's this? Like, do we know who this is? And like, well, she's a Moabite. She came back with Naomi. You've heard of Naomi, right? Because this is not the booming metropolis. This is everybody's heard of Naomi and what her situation is. And so this woman, she said, okay, can I follow behind the reapers to collect? So okay. So Boaz goes to Ruth. So it says, you're in a safe space, because this is an important thing to remember too. If you're back in this time and place, if you were a young single woman, it wasn't the safest thing, right? That you could be preyed upon in any number of ways. But Boaz says, I told my guys to take care of you. You don't have anything to be concerned about here. What's more, if you get thirsty, have some of the water that they have, and you have what you need here, because I've heard about what you've done. I've heard that you've left your family, you've left your people and your gods to come and be with Naomi, and I respect that. And he says, this is good too. So you go down to verse 12 in chapter 2. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Because she has. So she's left her gods and going with Naomi. As she said, she is taking refuge under the wings of the God of Israel. This is going to be a prophetic word here that Boaz speaks. He gives her food, says, have some bread, have some, eat with the workers, then go. Then she goes and continues to do the gleaning. So she goes back to her mother-in-law. She goes back to Naomi, and she has not just kind of the meager amount that maybe you would expect, but what? Like baskets full. And Naomi's like, what's going on? Because Boaz told his workers what? Let her do her gleaning with you while you're harvesting. So she's not getting the leftovers, but is able to collect even more. And Naomi's like, so where were you? You got all this? Because it was more than was expected. And she says, well, I worked in Boaz's field. And Naomi's, it hits her because she knows who Boaz is. He's a relative. And he's in this position of, this is a good thing to think too. So Boaz, he's in this position to do something for Naomi and Ruth, but also what is Boaz's character from what we've seen so far? He's being generous. He's caring for. He's admiring the loyalty that Ruth has shown. He's being generous to them. And this is the time of the judges. And what are people doing throughout the land? What is right in their own sight? They're not following in a godly way. But Boaz is different. So God has connected this widow and her widowed daughter-in-law, brought them back to the place where he's providing for his people. He has put a godly man there that is going to be a blessing as well. So Ruth's like, oh, this is good. He took care of us. He said, don't worry about it. Don't worry about having any harm come to me. So she keeps going back with Boaz's field with the other women that are working in his household, and God is providing for him there. Now, we get to this thing of this kind of weird thing with Ruth going over in the middle of the night and like laying at Boaz's feet and like, what's the deal? So, Naomi realizes that Boaz, as their relative, is in this position to help them and to fulfill familial responsibilities. So he or somebody in the family would be this Goel, which is the English translation we usually have is like a kinsman redeemer, which is kind of a harder thing for us to understand. But it's an important part of this story, an important part of the way that God continued to provide for his people. So the Goel would be somebody who's a family member who, if something happened to a woman's husband, that there are a few things of responsibility, or if a family, even if something didn't happen to a husband, if a family had to sell property because they were in need, the kinsman redeemer would have the opportunity and in some ways responsibility for purchasing the land that was sold from whoever bought it, so that it could stay in the family. Because ultimately, if you go back, everything that the people had in the land, they viewed as an inheritance from God, and as apportioned to families there too, so that it was important that the land would stay in the family. So that's the first thing, the land thing, which is good because also if you restore it to the family, that's more for the family as a whole. Okay, and then the second thing is what we call levirate marriage, where that if a husband died and the wife if they didn't have any children, the wife would then go to be married by the brother of the man who died, or the next closest relative, so that the new husband, any children born to them, particularly any sons, would then have the name for the deceased husband, so that the line could be continued there as well. So the God was continuing to provide for the people, make sure that lineage going forward there. So that was second part of it. And third part of it is probably one that we don't hear of as much, but is the redeemer of blood. So that if somebody was killed, then this kinsman redeemer would then kind of sounds like I don't know, like a Schwarzenegger movie or something like that, but would then hunt down the killer to bring justice. There's some other things that we can read on that. But anyway, so that's the role of the Goel, the kinsman redeemer. So Ruth tells Naomi, Naomi tells Ruth, go to Boaz and go lie at his feet. So dress up, clean up, wash yourself, put on your good clothes, go down to the threshing floor where they're working to process the crop, and then at night lay at his feet, uncover his feet there, and just kind of do whatever he tells you to do. Because she goes, Boaz, he eats, he drinks, has a good time with his guys there, and they lay down in the threshing floor, kind of by the grain. And so he wakes up in the middle of the night. Maybe his feet were chilly. She's uncovered his feet, right? And sees this woman there, and it's like, "What? Who are you?" It's like, "Oh yeah, Ruth from before." And he recognizes that this action, as Pastor Richard talks about in his message, this is a marriage proposal. This is saying, "You're my kinsman redeemer." So act on your responsibility. So Boaz sees this, and he realizes what it is. He knows who Ruth is. He knows everything that she's done. So tell you what, we'll do as you ask, but I can't, because there's somebody who's a closer relative who is first in line to be the Goel, first in line to be the kinsman redeemer. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to make sure you're taken care of. As Yahweh lives, this is a significant pledge that Boaz says there. We're going to make sure it happens, but also you need to go so that like wait till morning, then go, so it's not like it's anything indecent. There's no appearance of indecency that a woman was on the threshing floor here in the middle of the night. But he also gifts her with yet more grain, so that she and Naomi have plenty. So Boaz then gathers, because they would gather the people, like the official business of the town would be conducted in the gates, so kind of the public space where people will be going in and coming out. So the main traffic place, kind of central place there, where the elders of the town would gather around if there was any things to be debated or discussed, or transactions to be accomplished. So you have all the witnesses around, so nobody can say, well, they promised this. It's like, no, you've got a crowd of witnesses around you. So Boaz comes there around the gate of the town. He gets the elders together, and the closer relative that Boaz knows, he is coming by and says, okay, hey, got a deal for you. You know Naomi. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, they had to sell their land. They were in Moab. They're back. So it's your opportunity to buy the land, to redeem the land, so that it's back in the family. And this guy's like, okay, yeah, that sounds like a pretty good deal. Let's do that. And Bo's like, well, there's one more thing. You also need to marry Ruth from Moab to fulfill that Levitical or the Levirate marriage requirement. And then he's like, yeah, okay, second thoughts, no. Because why? That would potentially put his own property at risk, so that if he did have a son, right, it'd be going there as opposed to going to if he already had other children. So there's a potential conflict there. So he passes his right, and then they have this thing where it was back in those days, a deal was sealed with what? Take your sandal off your feet and you hand it to the other person. Like, okay, I guess it's like a handshake. Sure, people do all kinds of weird things. So that the deal is sealed, so that then Boaz is seeing, okay, this guy is waiving his first place opportunity to be the Goel. Boaz is going to take it up himself, so that he might redeem them, that he would bring Ruth into his household to be his wife, and that things would be restored in the way that they were. So it happens. So Boaz becomes Ruth's husband. They have a son whose name is Obed, and they take the baby, and Naomi, right, who says, "Call me what? Call me bitter. Call me Mara, because of everything I lost." Everything is reversed, and the people gathering around her said, "Isn't this better than having your sons and everything God has provided and God has now given through this daughter-in-law who loves you, has given you hope for new life, so that you have this baby here." So they name him Obed, who is apparently plays a role in some line here. Obed means the one who serves. He becomes the father of Jesse. Jesse becomes the father of David, King David. And that means that God has taken Ruth from Moab and put her in the line of whom? Jesus. Now, okay. Like, well, God, that's kind of a crazy thing. Well, I suppose we can let him do a one-off kind of thing like this. Anybody remember anybody else we've heard about as a woman from a foreign nation that got Rahab, who lived in Jericho? So in both these instances, we see this woman leaving her people and her gods to go be with God's people, the children of Israel. And God not only bringing them in, but like, if you think about, if the story as we're going through it is this tapestry, they're threaded into the central thread. And that's the faithfulness that God has, that he is doing this for his people. So that's kind of the story of Ruth there. But since we have a little bit, that's the nice thing about it being a shorter thing, we get to have a little more time to talk. Any questions you guys have about some of these things that were going on? Yeah. Well, there might be a wedding ceremony that I don't know. They don't describe anything in here, but I don't know from the Levirate marriage if there was like a wedding ceremony too, because you're in effect kind of standing in for the deceased husband. So there's that kind of pledging that goes on. There probably is still a ceremony that would happen. That's a good question. Well, no, because that's why the first guy turned it down. You redeem the whole package. So the kinsman redeemer is, and this is good. So you think about it, it's not a limited redemption. It's a comprehensive. So that it's the land, it's the wife, the name, right? All that coming along is the role of the kinsman redeemer is a comprehensive role. So if you think about it too, it points ahead to Christ as the one who is the kinsman redeemer, bringing back the one who was outside, who is in debt or lost, so that we might be reunited to the name. And it's a comprehensive redemption. Yeah. I remind me about something else I want to say, but yeah. Well, yeah, we don't exactly know how old Boaz was. He does make mention that one of the things that he admired about Ruth was that she wasn't running around with the young guys and like trying to find somebody there. So he might be a little bit older, and we don't know if he was widowed himself or if he'd never married. It doesn't say. But he remarks on that for Ruth, but that, as part of it, maybe he realizes that God is giving him a gift in Ruth for whatever his circumstance had been. I have a Alan reminded me of something else that I wanted to say. So we have a little, but I want to make sure you guys have plenty of time too. Any other questions or other things? Because it's kind of this neat thing, and this is what Pastor Richard talks about. Sorry if you haven't been to worship yet, spoiler. This is in the Bible to show God's faithfulness, and it really brings it together right there. Everything comes into focus right at the end. It's like, oh, this is King David's family line. Mm-hmm. Well, kind of, sort of. I guess that's what he's concerned about, is that it's not that he might have the additional property, but there's still part of it that's like his relatives, like it would go to the relatives' heirs. It doesn't go to his direct heirs like that. Now I want to mention this thing too. We were talking in the Lifelight class from Thursdays, looking at some things, and one of the things that came up is this concept we call the scandal of particularity. And the scandal of particularity, as it relates to us as Christians, is that God has worked in a particular way so that he came in a particular place, particular time. He's this guy that's there, this Jesus from this town in kind of a backwater part of the world in that period, and he's the way to God. No one else. That the only way for restored life with God is through this Jesus. And that's offensive to people. Well, why can't I have belief X or belief Y, or why can't I just live a good life? Or It's like, well, no, this is the way God works. One of the texts that we have in Scripture this week in worship is from John 3. Anybody know John 3:16? Anybody ever heard of that one? What's that verse? For God so loved the world that he gave his only son, his only begotten son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have life. Okay, which is great. But our English translation, it could be better. Because a better way of reading the Greek that's in there is, in this way, God loved the world. Not God so loved, like God loved the world this much, which is usually, as we're hearing it, what we're thinking. God loved the world this much that he gave his son. So yes, he did. But what it's actually saying is, in this way, God loved the world, that he gave his son. It's this particular way that God is working, so that if you know Jesus, because Jesus is the one who's bringing the redemption, it's not that you have to have like an understanding of Jesus' biography or something like that. It's not this intellectual kind of thing, but that God is doing this, and that through faith we trust that he is the one to bring us in. Now, connecting it back to Ruth, is it just for the children of Abraham? No, because in this way God loves the world. For God so loved the world. Not just God so loved the Hebrews, or the people of Israel. In this way, God loved the Moabites. You know them. God loves the Gentiles in this way, through this Jesus, that through him, that the world might have life. So that while it is particular, it's Jesus that God works, the rescue is for who? Everybody. It's universal. So the rescue comes for all through this Jesus. Yeah. Exactly right. It's Jesus. Jesus is saying that he's come for all. It's not based on what your lineage is or what your people group is that the rescue that he's come to bring is for all people. So that if anybody says, well, you Christians are exclusive, well, yeah, it has to be Jesus. There's no other way. And Jesus says it, but that doesn't mean you can't be part of it. That doesn't mean that Jesus didn't come for you too, Moabite or whatever. That's the nature of God's love, and that this story, right, is your story too. Okay. Any other questions or anything? Okay, next week, chapter 10, which means we're about a third of the way through after chapter 10. So we're moving right along. This is a lot of ground we're covering here. Okay, thanks, everybody.